introducing the science behind the healthiest eating known, whole food plant-based diet. This research is presented in summary format for quick and simple understanding. We'll cover why the worldwide vegan movement is growing, the scientific basis for it, the Western diet and our current state of health, the China study conclusions and our ability really to lower the cancer, heart disease, and diabetes rates, and you'll have a lot of resources to be able to continue your research if you desire. I'm Brad Marsh. I've got a BSc in biology from MAC, Bachelor of Ed from the University of Toronto, and Ontario College of Teachers. I'm certified. And I also have a certificate in plant-based nutrition from Cornell. We all have beliefs about all these things: healthy foods, proteins, diet, starch, media, food industry, health departments, but beliefs may not always be reality. Today we'll challenge some of those beliefs and improve health and longevity is the goal. For some basics in nutrition fundamentals, we have our macronutrients in food, the bulky food that we eat, protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Just as an overview of the protein here, it's built of amino acids. Its main use is growth and repair, and you'll see animal source proteins. Beef, pork, chicken, fish, eggs, lamb, turkey, seafood, milk, cream, yogurt, cheese are all animal sources of protein. But what's remarkable here really is there's many plant sources of protein. In fact, every plant contains protein. Tofu and soya, lentils, peas are slightly higher in protein than other plants. For fats and oils, lipids, otherwise, the big note here is the energy contained. It's very high energy, pretty much double what it is in protein carbohydrates. It's 10 calories per gram. It's mainly for mass energy storage, cell membranes. It's interesting that the animal sources for the fats are the same as the protein sources. And most plants, the notable thing here is most plants contain low amounts of fat. Nuts, avocado, olives, and seeds are higher fat, so those should be eaten in moderation, of course, and soybeans are even higher in fat. For carbohydrates, what's really of note here is there are long chains of glucose, and the energy is 5 calories a gram, half that of fat. Very important distinguishing factor here is that its main use of carbohydrates is our main energy source for the body. That's all that the brain will actually use for thinking is glucose. And for the rest of the body functioning, this is the main energy source. Interesting, no carbohydrates in animal sources, but plant sources are plentiful. Bread, pasta, potatoes, rice, quinoa, whole wheat, oats, barley, beans, all big sources of carbohydrates. This will become important a little bit later on. Moving to the state of health, 6 leading causes of death are listed here. Relating it to food is cancer, heart disease, stroke, and number 6, diabetes. Healthcare today, if you get in a car accident, you'll want to go to the hospital immediately. Emergency care is fantastic, as good as it can be now. And chronic care, though, is a losing battle. If we were doing well at chronic care, it wouldn't exist. That's long-term disease and illnesses. It is taking a long time to make a lot better. Interestingly enough, 75% of the cost of healthcare is due to chronic care. And you can see on this graph that healthcare costs as a percentage of GDP, gross domestic product, is increasing in the US and Canada and most Western diet countries around the world. Chronic care is divided into 3 main areas. It's cancer, it's heart disease, and diabetes. Those are our 3 leading food-related causes of death. And research and results are suggesting that it is the food, and the science for this is astounding, and really that's the point of this video, to summarize some of this science for you. The Western diet. Well, most of it is meat and dairy. Starch is about 20%, vegetables and fruit 5%, but meat and dairy, animal-based protein is the bulk of it. The China study is the largest study of human nutrition ever conducted. It was in conjunction with Cornell University, Oxford University, and the Chinese Academy of Preventive Medicine. It was a huge study, included 367 variables, 65 counties in China, 6,500 adults, and it did find 8,000 statistically significant associations between lifestyle, diet, and disease variables. That's a lot of stats. Protein obtained by eating both plants and animals, yes. Not generally used by the body for energy. And here's a new take on it. Animal protein, meat and dairy essentially, was found decades ago to help promote cancer. So this was revisited later, and we'll summarize that here now for you. But just to reiterate, animal protein includes all meats, yogurt, butter, milk, cream, fish, eggs, and seafood. So animal protein is all these sources here. And what they found is when they redid some of these experiments at Cornell, 20% of animal protein intake can promote cancer, and that's the #1 leading cause of death. So what does this mean? Well, pre-cancer foci, what we find is if the cancer is like a seed, if given the right conditions, it will grow, and the right conditions are 20% protein, animal protein that is. So when we had precancerous cells, we turned cancer on if we fed the lab animals 20% protein, and we turned the cancer off if we lowered it to 5% animal protein. And we could turn it back on again with 20% animal protein, and we could turn it back off again with 5% animal protein. This is an incredible breakthrough to actually stop the growth of cancer with a change in the concentration of animal protein in the diet of the lab animals. So let's take a look then. What are we finding? Well, if we take a look at where animal protein consumption is extremely high, all those countries on the Western diet are in the top right half of this graph here, and as the animal protein and fat intake increase, so does the rate of breast cancer. This is an incredible graph, and I've never heard anyone from the Breast Cancer Society and fundraisers talk about this relationship between high animal protein and breast cancer. I think people need to know the information in this graph. Other cancers related to animal protein, here's lymphoma, and you can see higher the animal protein consumed, higher the lymphoma deaths. And again, the Western diet, Canada's up there, Denmark's up there, top right-hand side. Male lung cancer versus animal fat intake. Top right-hand side, again, all the Western diet, higher the fat from animal sources ingested, higher the male lung cancer. Prostate cancer, same thing, top right-hand side of the graph, higher the input of dairy, really in this case. This is calcium, and this is animal source calcium, which is usually milk and cheese. Higher that sources, higher the amount eaten, higher the prostate cancer. I've never heard in all the fundraisers for prostate cancer anyone talk about reducing the amount of dairy, but certainly with a graph like this, it looks like prostate cancer is certainly related to dairy. Oh, but this is a bit of a different shift here. Look what happens. Plant protein. We increase the amount of plant protein. What happens to the breast cancer rate? It decreases, and that's a big shift. So more plant protein, less cancer. What Dr. T. Colin Campbell found in the China study was that casein, the cow's milk protein, 87% of it, promoted cancer at all stages of growth. It was the best promoter of cancer, and more people are hearing about the China study, but it is interesting this isn't front and center in the media, because this is something that people should know with these kind of cancer rates. Besides cancer, more milk protein, weaker bones. Now this is a switch from what we've all learned. Actually, what we find is the higher number of fractures occur in countries where the milk calcium intake is the highest. And again, the Western diet, top right-hand side of the graph. More calcium intake from animal sources, the higher the number of fractures. And this is from the World Health Organization in 1998. And it's a paradox is what they're calling it. They're saying, in the first point, hip fractures are highest in countries with the highest calcium intake, and lowest where calcium intake is lower. American women have one of the highest rates of hip fractures in the world. And the last one, most importantly, the adverse effect of protein, in particular the animal protein, might outweigh the positive effect of calcium intake. So what they're saying is the negative of the animal protein outweighs the positive from the calcium. That was in 1998. Also, more animal protein, more calcium excreted. So this is interesting. Higher the amount of protein a person eats, the more calcium we find in the urine. Now, why is that? This is all to do with acid load in animal protein. What happens here is the animal source protein, which is the top in top 4 in red there, what we find is they put a huge acid load on the body. Anything positive is an acid load. And essentially what it is the amino acids are slightly different in animal protein. They contain sulfur. That breaks down into sulfuric acid in the body. And the bones are used to counteract the acid, to neutralize the acid. And then the bones dissolve. So interestingly enough here at the bottom, what we find here with plant-based foods here, what we've got is an alkaline situation. These bones are being made stronger, or at least they're not being degraded like when you eat animal source calcium and protein. So from protein, let's take a look at fats and oils. Essentially they cause clots, and clots are a big problem. First, the fats cause arterial sclerosis, and they form these plaques in the arteries. When the plaques rupture, they form clots. Now, if you get a clot around your heart, that's a heart attack. That's the number 2 cause of death. And clots in the brain, they're strokes, and that's the number 3 cause of death. So these fats are very closely related to our causes of death, and we've worked out how these fats operate. If you look at the animal fat versus just the straight death rate around the world, again, higher amount of animal fat eaten, and we get a higher death rate. And again, we see it, the Western diet, all those countries that eat the Western diet are on the top right-hand side of this graph. Bottom line here is avoid all butter, margarine, meat, cheese, milk, olive oil, and all oils for that matter. It doesn't matter if it's plant oil. That's not a whole food when you're extracting the oil out of a plant. Okay, salad dressings are often very high in fat. Cod liver oil, we've always told that was good for us. No, it is not. Chocolates, anything high fat, read the fat grams, keep them low, 20 to 30 grams a day. We want to stay away from the oil. This is a very telling graph here. During World War II, rationing, less meat and dairy, what we find is less death. If you look at around 1940, that's when the rationing was introduced. The mortality from circulatory diseases dropped off like a cliff there when they weren't eating as much meat and dairy. The war ends around 1945. The meat and dairy come back into the population, and again, the mortality from circulatory diseases again shoots up. It's a very telling graph there from Norway. Dr. Esselstyn, no more heart disease. Basically, the famous line is no oil, no oil. He's the one who tracked all these ruptures and plaques and also reversed the heart disease with many of his patients in many clinical studies. You can read about it in his book here. But basically, in a nutshell, he says coronary heart disease is a benign food-borne illness which need never exist or progress. So we can definitely reverse all this heart disease in our society. Moving on now to diabetes, because this is affected. Essentially, in a nutshell, diabetes is abnormal glucose metabolism and also the number 6 leading cause of death. Normally, insulin makes cells take in glucose from the bloodstream after a meal. But with type 2 diabetes, cells are insulin resistant. They don't accept the glucose, and the blood sugar rises and spills into the urine, and that's usually how it's initially diagnosed. But there's a paradigm shift going on with type 2 diabetes now, and it's the fats and oils that seem to be causing the insulin resistance. So fats and oils block insulin action, and so blood sugar increases. So carbs are not the big enemy all the time here, and carbs can even increase sensitivity of cells to the insulin, so they can actually be good for the insulin. Diabetics should now be fat counting instead of carb counting all the time, and certainly consider the whole food plant-based diet as it is having a very positive effect on insulin requirements. This is something that a lot of people don't know. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. Our bodies do not make it except under starvation conditions. It's what we eat. So again, count the fat grams. It's affecting the diabetic situation as well as heart disease and the strokes. If you look at this graph here, it's a correlation between diabetes and obesity. As we see over the years since 1990 here, obesity rates are increasing, and we certainly have type 2 diabetes increasing as well. And they're very closely related, as you can see. Fat is having an effect here. For type 1 diabetes, the pancreas produces no insulin. So insulin injections are required by type 1 diabetics. The fat counting is still recommended, we see up to a 30% reduction in insulin requirements when we go on a whole food plant-based diet. And that's because, again, carbohydrates seem to increase the cell sensitivity to insulin, and they then absorb more sugar, alleviating some of the diabetics' requirements for insulin in this case. And this is a disturbing trend as well. What we find here is the more milk consumed by a society, the more type 1 diabetes. And again, on the top right-hand side, Finland, Norway, highest milk consumption and also the highest amount of type 1 diabetes. Is there a relationship? Yes. The proposed mechanism for increasing type 1 diabetes with milk is when infants are fed cow's milk protein, their immune system reacts to it and attacks their own pancreas and kills the cells that produce insulin. These are the islets of Langerhans. They're destroyed, but it's autoimmune. They're destroyed by the baby's own body. The remedy is do not feed infant cow's milk for at least the first 2 years of life, and better yet, no dairy at all. But certainly the first 2 years of life, people should know that, because there is a huge relationship with type 1 diabetes, and a genetic predisposition is linked here as well. This is an extremely important graph and really a summary of all the other graphs you've seen so far. The killer diseases are heart disease and cancer. What do we see here? The more plants we eat, country to country, the less heart disease and cancer that we see. And if you look at this data from around the world, it spells it out pretty clearly here, is that animal protein and fat is doing a lot of harm. The conclusion of the China study, essentially, a whole food plant-based diet helps protect you from cancer, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, autoimmune diseases, bone, kidney, eye, and brain diseases. We haven't touched on a lot of those other ones. Read the book if you want more information on those for sure. You can change your mind with new information. As Edward de Mono says, if you don't change your mind, why have one? We are supposed to be thinking about these issues. Making the switch, well, look at the little carnivore talking to the giant vegan there. The common question is, are you sure you're getting enough protein? Well, you can get all the protein you need from plants. What are the human protein requirements? Let's take a look at this for a moment here. On the third line is the breastfed infant, 5 to 6% of percent from calories from protein. And that's what a growing child needs. And remember, the main use for protein is growth and repair. And so this is, I think, quite an important percentage here to make note of. You'll see the Asian diet, McDougall diet, 8 to 15% range there. So not anywhere near as much as the Western diet, 15 to 32. And look, that's above that 20% threshold for creating cancer in the lab animals. And the zone diets, many of these other diets, South Beach diet, Atkins diet, all in the higher than 20% range. And people should be aware of those types of diets for sure based on the information that we're seeing. So we have a new target diet. Look, meat and dairy has been taken over by starch. Basically, meat and dairy is very low percentage, close to 0% as you can get it. Vegetables 20%, fruits 10%. A lot of starch now. Why is that? Well, it does get slandered repeatedly in the media as mainly bad for you. Good starch is only made by plants, complex carbohydrates, and comes with fiber for proper digestion. And that's a very important factor for decreasing your gastric transit time. And there are bad starches, which are refined simple sugars. But let's look a little bit at the history of starch. Basically, from Dr. McDougall here, all populations of trim, healthy people throughout verifiable human history have obtained the bulk of their calories from starch. And a lot of historians are calling us starchivores rather than omnivores, herbivores, carnivores, really a lot of starch. If you look at these societies for the last several thousand years here, their main sources of starch, barley, corn, millet, oats, sorghum, rice, rye, wheat, thousands of years, all these different societies surviving on starch. And don't worry, de novo lipogenesis, which is turning sugar into fat, does not occur except under starvation conditions, and that's not likely the case with most of the people watching this video. Basically, sugar does not turn into fat in your body. Nutrient comparison. Plant-based foods, animal-based foods. Take 500 calories of each. So on the plant-based side, we got tomato, spinach, beans, potatoes, and peas. And on animal, beef, pork, chicken, and milk. So look at the cholesterol. First of all, You definitely want to reduce your cholesterol to as low as you possibly can. The body makes its own cholesterol. You don't need to eat it from outside sources. You can see the cholesterol is much higher with the animal-based foods. The fat, that's a huge factor there, much higher with the animal-based foods. And interestingly enough, the protein, almost the same. Now, if you're talking about the vitamins and the minerals there, and this is true for basically all the vitamins and minerals, they're much higher from plant-based foods, so you get all your supply there. And certainly there's no fiber in animal-based foods, lots of fiber to keep your digestive system functioning properly from the plant-based foods. To be on the safe side, don't take vitamins. In a nutshell, whole foods have a natural balance of vitamins and all the micronutrients that we need. What vitamins do essentially is flood receptor sites with one nutrient, and they could block many other types of nutrients. It upsets a cell balance, and there's many inconclusive studies, and there's many linking illnesses, including cancers, to too many vitamins. So to be on the safe side, get your vitamins and nutrients from plants. They're in your body's very used to them like that, and they're not used to them in pills. The Pleasure Trap, book by Doug Lisle, Why We Love the Sweet and Fatty Foods. Essentially, we're innately attracted to high caloric density foods for survival. Corporate marketing exploits these instincts in us, and breaking the addiction from these high-fat foods feels wrong, and there is a withdrawal. So let's compare the caloric density of some different foods here. From fruits, only 440 calories for a kilogram. But if you go all the way to the other end, fats and oils, 8,800 calories for every 1 kilogram. Well, how can 1 kilogram of foodstuff contain so many different calories? Well, the molecules are different. It's just a different makeup. And essentially, there's a lot of energy inside fats and oils, and that's why they make you fat. And basically, the starches, middle of the road here, bread, pasta, potatoes, that's enough energy for us to move and breathe and keep ourselves functioning at a high rate, athletes included. The fruits and vegetables are much lower calorie. It's hard to, you don't feel as full on those ones. The starches is where we want to be in terms of our energy. And when we feel full, look at 400 calories in the bottom of the stomach. Barely takes up any room when you're talking about oil. But 400 calories of, well, fried chicken there, a little bit more room, but you're still empty stomach. 400 calories of vegetables fills the stomach completely. You feel full. So you can eat a lot less, and really, which is where some of the weight loss starts to come into play as well. You're just not eating as many calories. You're not eating as much. Essentially what we're saying here is change your food from meat and dairy to starch and vegetables, and that is the whole food plant-based diet. Make a switch in what you're eating. And it will help you in these ways. It will definitely give you more energy, help you lose weight, and still enjoy eating because, as the stomach picture said, you can still feel full after every meal. You will feel better. You'll be less tired after your meals. Certainly savings on your grocery bill. It's cheaper to eat, lower on the food chain. It does help stop animal suffering, certainly on our factory farms, and it does reduce your environmental footprint. More specifically, it also has these effects as well. Lowering cholesterol, blood sugar, insulin levels, IGF-1, that's insulin growth factor 1 levels. Reduces the risk of thrombosis, which is essentially your clots there. Reduces heart attack risk, type 2 diabetes, obesity, insulin resistance, colon cancer, gastric cancer risk. Improves your bowel function for sure with the fiber. Really makes a difference. You'll notice that in the first day or two. Increases the bowel transit time, which is good. You don't have rotting food sitting inside you for any longer than necessary to digest and get the nutrients out. Relieves constipation, better bacteria, lots of antioxidants in the fruit and vegetables. So there's a lot of benefits here with eating like this. If you're looking for recipes, there's tons of them. Dr. John McDougall will tell you everything you know about a whole food plant-based diet. Certainly all these recipes are available on the internet. There's just so many of them now, and there's so many products available. Avoid isolated soy protein, of course. That increases the insulin growth factor 1 levels. You don't want that. It could lead to cancer. Lots of recipes on the internet. Books. The Starch Solution is the simplest and easiest one to understand. All the whole food plant-based diet principles are in there. The Starch Solution says it all. The China Study, if you're more scientifically, technically oriented, then the China Study is the way to go, and many other books available. check all these ones out. They're all the research, and they're all referenced. It's an amazing amount of science involved here. Lots of documentaries available to watch on Netflix and YouTube. Forks Over Knives, Starch Solution, Cow Nation, Plan Eat, What the Health, Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, Vegucated, Food Choices, Hungry for Change, and Defense of Food. Lots of information available here. This is a big and growing movement, as you know. And the doctors leading the charge here, Colin Campbell with the China study and Dr. McDougall, Caldwell Esselstyn. There's lots of doctors that are getting on board with this because they're finding it works on their patients. Good luck with this. You can do this for sure. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and don't be afraid to go back, stop it, and reread what I've sent you here. Take care, and good luck with it.